The way that the Bible has been interpreted has been slowly degenerating throughout all the centuries. The modern idea that the Bible is a historical document that recounts the physical or literal truth of events that happened, something like a newspaper, this is a very superficial and false interpretation. So the idea that things literally happened as they were written in the Bible was never really the intention. In the same way that you look at more ancient religions, we view those stories as myths that teach something. The difference with Christianity is that it's a newer religion, and that the way that the Bible came together is specifically related to the way that Jesus taught. He taught all of his religion with his physical life. He actually created situations in the physical world in order to teach, in order to mimic the spiritual path that we all have to undergo. And his disciples knew this and also took those sort of literal historical events and then wrote about them in ways that imparted even more spiritual wisdom, using certain types of words and symbols and analogies. And they took heavily from, obviously, the Hebrew tradition. It should be no surprise that Jesus was extremely well-versed in all the Judaic mysteries and the Judaic traditions. Most importantly were at the time, the oral traditions of Kabbalah, which was not written down in any way until much later, but nevertheless existed. They translated all of those types of words into Greek words, or into the language of the modern day, of that time. So when you read the New Testament, you can actually find the Greek words and then realize that they are talking about a translation that is originally from a Hebrew word written with those letters, with that alphabet. So the first thing we need to understand is that when we say Christ, Christ is not an individual. Christ is a force or an energy or a fire, a spiritual light. The word Christ comes from Greek, from Christos, which means anointed one. That anointing, from an esoteric perspective, means fire. When we say fire, of course, we're not just talking about a literal fire. We're talking about all of the symbolism. If we look at any religion, you see fire and light is always related to spiritual principles, because that speaks to the language of our spirit. In the same way that electricity flows through all the different light bulbs, the electricity is common. The light bulbs individualize that energy into different ways, different voltages, different types of luminosity. So we all are a vessel or a vehicle for that type of energy, and we have the ability to make that light shine in higher and higher degrees, depending upon our own work. So fire, of course, is a activity. It is we look at the literal, what's happening when something's burning. There's a chemical thing going on there. Energy is being transformed. Heat and light is being transmitted. And the thing that's being burned is being reduced to ashes. So to set fire upon the earth is to radically transform it. So fire is, in a sense, destructive, but it is in a better sense understood as transformative. So that's a little bit about what we mean by Christ in an esoteric perspective. The second aspect, when we talk about Christ, we always relate that to Jesus. So Jesus was an actual person. Jesus is another symbolic name that has meaning underneath it. According to the Gnostic scriptures, Jesus' actual name is Aberramento. But we use the word Jesus because it points towards something. And it's not an accident that we're using the word Jesus. So the word Jesus in Hebrew would be spelled Yod He Shin Vav He, which more literally would translate into Yeshua. But we, Latinize that into Jesus. So Yod can give you various vowels. In this case, it's the Y sound. He is that E. Yeah, and then Shin is where you get the SH. So Yeshua. So this is very interesting, especially if you know anything about Hebrew. If you happen to have studied that or you grew up being Jewish, you may recognize four important letters here, which is Yod, He, Vav, He. Now, Yod, He, Vav, He is the most important name of God, according to Judaism. And it is the letters that are traditionally translated as Jehovah. Now, Yod, He, Vav, He is so revered that the tradition in Judaism is that you never actually say these letters. You never actually pronounce them. You say instead Lord or God or something else in that language that points towards it. For example, you can say Hashem, which means the name. Instead of actually saying the name, you say the name. In Greek, this is called the tetragrammaton. Tetra being four, and grammaton being lettered, four-lettered name of God. Which, of course, is translated as Jehovah, which Kabbalistically we call Yod Chava. So these four letters really represent the creative principles within us. Because we know that if you read Genesis, Jehovah or Yod Hava is doing everything. He's creating everything through those days of Genesis. He's the creator. There's some mistaken people who consider themselves to be Gnostic who believe that Jehovah was some kind of negative god or something like that, and the Gnostics are always speaking against Jehovah. There's a tremendous type of misinterpretation going on there that I won't fully go into now because you don't have time. But you can't be against Jehovah because Jehovah is your interior creative principles. Yod Hava is your inner being. Yod Hava is your inner spirit. Now, your inner spirit is an infinite potential, so it can be represented in infinite types of ways. But when we represent it as Yod Hava, we are representing it when it partitions itself into a duality, which is the eternal masculine and feminine principles. Now, when we say the words masculine and feminine, we'll automatically think of ourselves as man and woman and then superimpose that upon God. But that's wrong. It's the opposite way around. The eternal masculine and feminine principles are what have been superimposed upon us to make us man or woman. We are simply a representation or an anthropomorphization of these eternal principles. So we should not bring into us all of our very simplistic and negative understandings of what sex and sexuality is and put that onto Jehovah. That's wrong. The simple reality is that to create anything, you need to combine forces. To make something new, it's a combination of elements that come together. And you see this physically in everything, chemistry. Putting together anything, the forces of you putting it together in relationship to all of the obstacles that want it to be put together. Forces have to move. So at an abstract level, in order for creation to be here, Jehovah, Yod-Hava, needs to manifest that. And when certain beings have an inner Yod-Hava that is so well developed and realized, then that Yod-Hava can actually create a world system. Why? Out of compassion, in order to place other beings in it, so that those inner beings can develop their Yod-Hava. Because when we develop your inner being, you develop wisdom, self-realization, cognizance. There's an eternal truth, which is that complete and total happiness is impossible unless you have cognizance of what it is. If you are happy, or if there's a type of happiness or bliss, but you are not fully realized into what it actually is, then your happiness is still incomplete. Just like a small way of understanding that is when you're a child and you don't realize how happy you are until later, or how good it was. Any small infant just spontaneously laughing and being happy. But at the same time, they don't have a self-recognition or self-cognizance of what that bliss and joy is. They're just naively expressing it. And later, as we grow up and our ego develops, that all gets obscured and smushed. And then now that we have some idea of what it might be, we can't get back to it. And this is the crux. This is why we have to do the work. When we gain experiences, we gain a lot of baggage, to put it in light terms. We gain a lot. We develop a lot of what we call the ego, which calcifies and encrusts layer after layer in such a way that you can't just think yourself out of it. You can't just want to be happy and then you're happy, because you've actually created something internally that prevents it, and you have to now destroy it. So Yod He Vav He represents the feminine and masculine principles. The first two letters, Yod He, represent the cosmic masculine and feminine, or the eternal masculine and feminine principles. Yod, you can see, is just a little dot. Yod is like the little seed. He is like a womb, the receptive element that receives that seed. Then the next two letters, Vav and He. Well, we see a repetition of the letter He, of course. Vav, in the current way I'm explaining it now, Vav is now representative of that eternal principle manifesting in us, in the masculine sense, in men. And then He is that eternal principle being manifested as the femininity, as woman. These four letters can be interpreted in a myriad of ways, because again, we're talking about cosmic principles. So another way of understanding this, just another shift, totally, completely still valid, is to understand these as the Trinity plus something extra, which I'll explain. What I mean by the Trinity is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The first three letters, Yod, He, Vav, that is the Trinity. The fourth letter is just the repetition of He, represents that which has not been actualized yet, which we're calling here the infinite spiritual potential. Because Yod, He, Vav represents the three primary forces, which is the affirmation force, the negation force, and the reconciliation force. Those three things coming together are how anything is created. We have to understand that when we talk about creation, we can talk about the three forces, and we also talk about the two forces. when we discuss the four-letter name of God in relationship to the tree of life, the first letter would be related to the top Sephiroth, Keter, which is the Father in Christianity. The second letter, which is He, would be related to Hokmah, which is the Son, also called the second Logos. First Logos, second Logos. And then the third Logos is the third Sephiroth, which is Binah, which is related to the Holy Spirit. These three principles live within every cosmic unit, reverberate everywhere. So within us, we have these three principles. Within every cosmic unit, those three principles exist. So that's the Trinity. And the fourth letter is related to that which is not yet fully manifested, which is actually related to this region up here above Keter, which would be we would specifically point to the Ein Sof hour. Why? Because the Ein Sof hour means limitless light. The word hour means light. Sof means the limit or end or finality of. And Ein is like an ultimate negation of nothingness. So the way that you translate this is limitless light. Limitless light is Christ. It's another name for Christ. A portion of that limitless light gets manifested. Right? Every manifestation is limited by its nature. So even after the creation, there's still a portion of the limitless light that remains. And that portion always wants to be known and expressed. So it's always more. This is always an activity of more light descending and more light. But there's always a He there of more light because it's limitless and it's always descending. So that He, which is related to the Ein Sof Or, you can imagine like a placid lake where the image is reflected, the sky is reflected on the lake. There's this He, this limitless womb, because the He represents a womb, and a womb represents potential. That's where something's created. So you have the unmanifested potential. Something's created, and in this water then reflects that He in creation in a manifestation form. There's a lot that we're talking about here. I'm going pretty quick. The basic understanding is that there's something very particular about the name Yeshua because it has Yod He Vav He in it, plus one extra letter. Shin. So just to recap, we have the word Jehovah, we have a word Yeshua, Joshua. These are all related. So the thing that we're going to actually focus on today is the book of John, chapter 4, starting at verse 46. This is actually considered the second miracle in the book of John. First miracle being the transmutation of water into wine at the wedding. Now that's a whole lecture that we gave some time ago, but suffice it to say, it's called the first miracle, but really the right way to understand that is the beginning of miracles, meaning that none of the other miracles are possible until the beginning of miracles occurs, meaning it's the most important. Nothing transpires until the water is transmuted into wine. So in other words, these miracles were not just something that Jesus performed in order to impress people. The higher spiritual understanding is that these are events that are transpiring within us, which means that all the characters in this story are principles or aspects within us. Everything's going on inside of ourselves. And we have to train our mind to read the Bible in this way, to meditate a lot. Because when you first read it, we've all been educated in a wrong way to just read these things historically. And it's really not going to help us. That's not the tradition. So to begin, it says that Jesus came again into Cana of Galilee, where he made the water wine. So in a previous miracle, he went to the wedding at Cana in Galilee. So right off the bat, what does Cana of Galilee represent? Well, we see that he went into Galilee, and actually in the next verse he says, when he heard that Jesus was come out of Judea. So Jesus went out of Judea and into Galilee. This already is telling us something. We know that Jesus, or Yeshua, if it's not already clear, is representing within us the highest spiritual principles within ourselves. We would say we have our physical body and our energy, our vital, nervous, sexual energy, and then we have our mind and our reasoning and our volition. That's sort of kind of what we see moment to moment. And beyond that, we have our spirit, which is, like I said, one of these light bulbs. But beyond the spirit is Christ. Yeshua represents something very particular coming from beyond our spirit, coming down into us. So Yeshua belongs up in the top triangle, and even you could say in the Ein Sof hour. And he was down in Judea. Now, Judea has the letters Yod, He, Vav, Dalet, He. So once again, it has the 4 letters plus another one called Dalet. Dalet, again, we could get into all these things, but Dalet means doorway. In any case, Judea represents a spiritual aspect of ourselves. It represents our spirit. So that Yeshua was in the realm of the spirit. And then he descended down into Galilee. Galilee represents a sort of incomplete or fallen state that we are in. Now, the reasons for that is a whole nother lecture I gave. The reality is this letter Lamed, which is this one, the L in Galilee. There's 2 of them. This letter Lamed starts at the very top. It has a little thing. It has a little yod above the normal letters, and then goes all the way down. So Lamed represents a descension of energy from the very top all the way down. Then on the right side there's a Gemel, but on the left side there's only a yod. What this represents is within ourselves we have always a connection to God, of course, to our inner spirit. But at the same time, there's something very much incomplete and fallen about ourselves. So when we talk about these 2 aspects, we can say that the right side of ourselves is still connected. The left side is not. And the reason why these things are represented by Gimel is that on the right side, there's a Sephiroth called Gedula, which starts with Gimel. And on the left side, there's a Sephiroth called Geborah, which starts with Gimel. So on the right side, you have Gimel Lamed, which represents that this Gimel of Gedula on the right side is connected. This is represented because we have a spiritual connection. But on the left side, the G of Geburah, which is the other aspect of our spirit, is not connected. It's in potential only. That's why it's a Yod. A Yod always represents just the dot of potential that has not been developed. So that Yod needs to be developed into the left Gimel. The word Gimel is actually related to the word camel, which represents traveling in the desert. So we have to make that travel. And we have to be that camel that goes through the eye of the needle. That's what that's about. Because when we transform that Yod into a Gimel, we get another name in the Bible instead of Galilee, we get Gilgal. Gilgal is a place in the Old Testament that's extremely holy. So we need to transform Galilee into Gilgal. But in this story, Jesus, or Yeshua, is descending from Judea into Galilee. Now, if you don't know any of the Kabbalah behind it, it just feels like, oh, just a bunch of places on a map. But what this is saying is that the forces of the Absolute are descending from the Spirit into the physical body, even down this low into our physical body, in order to perform a miracle. So Jesus came again into Cana of Galilee, where he made the water wine, and there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. Capernaum is another place I took a lecture to describe. Capernaum means the city of consolation or the city of expiation. So Capernaum really means where we need to go to atone for our sins. We need to comprehend our errors and eliminate them. So we talked about that a lot in the lecture called the psychological cleansing of the temple. So there's a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus was come out of Judea into Galilee, he went unto him and besought him that he would come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Then said Jesus unto him, except ye see signs and wonders, ye will not have faith. The royal official saith unto him, Sir, come down, ere my child die. Jesus saith unto him, Go thy way, thy son liveth. And the man had faith, the word that Jesus had spoken unto him, and he went his way. So, who is the nobleman, and who is the sick son? If we consider that, what I said before, every character in here is something going on inside of ourselves. So what is the nobleman? What is the nobility within ourselves? Who is our inner king and queen? It's our own that's our own inner spirit. They should rule over they are our, our inner being is who we serve. So that's our inner royalty. And so therefore, who's the sick son? It's us. We're sick. It's us. So there's a relationship going on here between us, our spirit, and Christ. Our spirit is asking for help from Christ to help heal us. So there's a lot of Kabbalah here. Both Galilee and Capernaum are related to the lower aspects, of course. Even the word Cana means cane or reed. And that represents the space or energy that begins to ascend within us. If you think of a reed where it has different pockets, like a bamboo reed has these different pockets, and each one of them is a sealed aspect that holds water, in this case, energy. It represents our spinal column. You know that the halo that appears is always at the top of our head. This is because the energy is ascended up the spinal column. And if you have that type of vision, it's because it's showing that energy is completely pure. It's able to flow up and down through their nervous system. Because we're not just existing physically, we have internal bodies as well. And when we manifest those and we make those clean, then we become that light bulb very literally. So Cana means that reed or the pen or the place where the energy is transmitting up and down. And then Galilee, I already explained Galilee in relationship to Gilgal. So continuing on with the scripture, and as he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, Thy son liveth. Then inquired he of them the hour when he began to amend And they said unto him, Yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. So the father knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said unto him, Thy son liveth. And himself believed, and his whole house. This is again the second miracle that Jesus did when he was come out of Judea into Galilee. So the first miracle is the transmutation of water into wine at the wedding feast. So again, there's a whole lecture on that, but it's really unfortunate that people believe that that is just a sort of story about celebrating getting drunk at a wedding. That's not what it's about. It's about the type of chemistry that can occur in marriage. And it's important that if you want the miracles to occur within yourself, you first have to start with a proper foundation, which is transmutation of energy, as we talked about. If you're wasting sexual energy, then none of the other miracles can occur, because that is the root fuel. It has to be transmuted, has to be worked with. It can't remain stagnant. Just like if you have gasoline in a canister, if you leave it there for too long, it degrades and it's no longer good for anything. But also, it's not good if you light it on fire and it explodes. But it's good if you use it properly, then it's energy that can move things. Same thing with sexual energy. If you use it to just make explosions, then you're wasting it. But if you don't use it at all, well, you're wasting it again in a different way. Within that energy is Yod Hava, of course. The creative impulse comes all the way down and it manifests what we consider the lowest aspects of ourselves, which is where our animal sexuality is. And we have to start there and start refining it and becoming less and less of an instinctual animal person and developing the superior archetypes that make us more and more human. And we do that by working with the very creative energy that we have. Once we start to do that, then the second miracle can occur, which is to relieve ourselves of this scorching heat, which is a fever that we have. The 7th hour is what's really important here. When the Bible talks about something happening at a certain hour, it's very intentional. So in this case, things are happening at the 7th hour. 7th hour is related to the 7th letter, which is zayin. So let's talk about zayin for a little bit. Zayin, in order to understand it, we need to go back a letter, which is the 6th letter, which is vav. So zayin looks like a vertical letter with a little horizontal part at the top. Vav is very similar, except the vertical aspect is clearly on the right side, whereas on zayin, the vertical aspect is coming sort of a little bit more to the left in the middle of it. So let's talk about vav. Vav, again, is one of those 4 letters that we talked about at the beginning of the lecture. And vav is, again, you could say that every single Hebrew letter starts with a yod that has been then, almost like that yod is like the tip of the pen that moves. But in this case, it's very simple to see that the yod, if you extend it down, creates the vav. Vav is literally the word that, the letter that means and in Hebrew. So in the book of Genesis, when it said, and Jehovah saith, or and Jehovah did this, it's vav. Vav, 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 vav. So vav represents the connector in between two ideas. It also represents the connection between anything, connection between heaven and earth, the connection between man and God. That vav, again, is our spinal column. It's just another representation that, you know, when Moses did all of his miracles, he had the staff. That staff is the vav that connects him. So vav represents the vertical connection. And zayin also represents a vertical connection, but when you relate Vav and Zayin to each other, Vav represents the right side, Zayin represents the left side. Zayin literally means sword. Zayin is also related to the tongue, to speech. Obviously, the tongue can be a two-edged sword. The sword is carried by the hero. So when we are on our path and we're trying to fight against our enemies, which again is ourself, we are trying to work on reconnecting ourselves on that left side. Because again, the fact that we can sit down and relax and begin to meditate and feel the force of our inner divinity indicates that we have a connection to God. But the fact that it is difficult to meditate indicates that we are missing the left side of the connection to God. Because you consider the energy coming down the right side and going down into us. And from there, it is up to us, our willpower, our volition, our action is what completes the circuit. If we don't complete it, then we still have a connection, but it's latent, it's lame, it doesn't walk, it doesn't walk the path, and we suffer ultimately. So it's our action that we pick up the sword, we begin to work on our own defects, and we begin that connection, that path on the left side. So there's a symbol of the two witnesses before the throne of God, which is in the book of Revelation. And people don't know what this means, but the two witnesses are these two, the left and the right side within ourselves, which is represented by a certain energetic channel in our body itself. Obviously, we have two nostrils, and our gonads, we have two. Their testicles or ovaries. So the bottom of that connection is related to our sexual organs. The top of that connection is related to the root of our nose. And in between them is this type of serpentine connection. So zayin is the fallen's left side. Zayin has tremendous power and glory, but also, again, it could be used for our own self-gratification. And this is the whole story of Adam and Eve. Become tempted. And they are representing all of us that we've fallen into disgrace. And that's because the left side is what we abuse. It's our own action, our own volition. So we need to raise that left side up again. And when we do that, that's when we relieve ourselves of this scorching heat. If we visualize the letter Vav on top of the tree of life, we can put it on the right side. Now, the letter Vav needs to be understood in different ways. The letter Vav by itself, when we're not relating it to the duality between Vav and Zayin, Vav can represent the middle column, which is... But when we relate it to the duality, it's on the right side. And Zayin is on the left side. So when we work correctly on our path, we always have the right side, and then we erect or rectify the left side. And when you put a zayin and a vav next to each other, you actually form another letter, which is the 8th letter. So vav is the 6th letter, zayin is the 7th letter, chet is the 8th letter. Chet is life, because the word in Hebrew for life is chaim. So when we say tree of life, we say otz chaim, life or living or lives. So when Jesus said, your son liveth at the 7th hour, he's saying, raise your zayin and you will have chaim, life. Zayin means weapon or sword and represents returning light on the left side, which crowns or illuminates the vav on the right side. Together, zayin on the left and vav on the right form het, which is life. Chaim is spelled het yod. Het is, again, formed with vav and zayin, which is connected at the top. Het is the first letter for the Hebrew word for life. Het symbolizes the motion of universal life, the light of the Ein Sof Aor. Het symbolizes the life that emerges from any marriage. But more important than physical life is spiritual life. So a lot of times people will relate the life of marriage is offspring, physical offspring, of course. But we're talking about esotericism. Esotericism is giving spiritual life, life inside of yourself, multiplying inside of yourself. No, people say that you need to be fruitful and multiply, because Jehovah said, be fruitful and multiply. But the esoteric meaning of that means be fruitful in all of the Sephiroth and multiply your light in all of the Sephiroth. So the Father knew that it was at the same hour, the 7th hour, in which Jesus said unto him, thy son liveth, chaim. And himself, it says believed here, but really should say has faith. Now the word belief, or this word here that we should translate as faith, is pistis. We talked about 4 states of consciousness, and one of them is pistis. And pistis isn't necessarily one of the good states. We have to understand the word pistis in 2 ways. When we talk about the 4 states of consciousness, pistis is a negative state. It's seeing, but you're seeing your own subjective opinions and ideas in a very negative way. It's the left side of tree of life inverted, the way that we are today. The type of pistis that is the superior type, which we call faith, is not a belief. It's not a blind belief where you just have courage to believe in something that you've never experienced. It's the opposite. It's because you have spiritual sight, because you've lifted the left side of your inner temple, you now see spiritually. You experience it. It's not a belief. You experience it. When you have direct experience of something, you don't blindly believe in it. You know it because it's happening within yourself. So unfortunately, that's all been messed up today. Today's language. I think that, well, faith is, well, we don't know anything about what happens after we die, and we don't know anything about anything. You just have to have the courage to believe. And that's not what faith is at all. Faith is you're meditating, you're comprehending, and you're beginning to see things directly, and you don't need to believe in it. So we say as Gnostics, we don't believe in God. That's not what we want, at least. We want to experience it level by level. One of the other things that Jesus states is that, except ye see, which is ra in Hebrew, except ye see signs, which is often translated as miracles. And signs in Hebrew is nes. And except ye see, you won't have faith. And that's what we're talking about here. You have to be able to see it. So, the missing letter that we haven't really unveiled too much yet is shin. All this is coming together, hopefully. I know it's a lot. So remember, Yod He Vav He is the 4-letter name of God. You put shin in the middle, you get Yeshua. Well, shin represents the 3 flames of the Trinity as well. But shin is the letter for fire. There's what's called the 3 mother letters, Aleph, Shin, and Mem. Aleph is related to the top of that tree of life, which is the air. Shin is related to the middle triangle, related to our heart. Fire, the fire of our heart. And then Mem is related to the 3rd triangle, which is related to our lower aspect, our sexual waters. Mem is water. So air, fire, water. So the shin is that Christic element. The problem is shin can be polarized positively or negatively. So that shin, you can even see the very image of shin looks like 3 wicks burning on one thing. It's a symbol of the Trinity, right? And we see in other religions, the staff, a trident, always represents those 3 forces. And we also represent the devil sometimes with a trident, which is that fire inverted. What is this fire within us? So this fire is constantly descending. And it's this sort of, why do we do anything? Why do we decide to express our opinion about anything? Why do we have a desire or an impulse to do this versus that? It's this inner activity. Something's always, even if it's something mundane, as when someone says something and you just have an opinion and you express it, or you have a strong reaction. You don't like what they said, or you're really burning up inside. So that there's this activity going on. And because we're very asleep and we really don't know how to handle it, before we even remember anything, we're already talking, we're already expressing, we're already doing whatever. You have to understand all this activity. It's like we're animated because we have this inner fire. And we are always, again, it's our willpower, it's our volition, it's our choice to always move that energy in the right way. The only way to do that is to really awaken and comprehend what's going on moment by moment. Samael Unveyor states that temptation is fire, triumph over temptation is light. A lot of times our first impulse is it's a very wrong way for us to behave, to feel, or to think. A lot of times we only view ourselves as when we're actually physically behaving in the physical world. But before that, we're already feeling and thinking. We need to catch ourselves. Again, it's a long work, but to catch ourselves earlier and earlier in that process, more and more subtle, and comprehend, why is it that I have this negative feeling at this moment? Why don't I have universal compassion? A lot of people play this game in their head and say, well, I just wasn't built that way. It's just who I am. I'm just a short-tempered person. I've always been this way, blah, blah, blah. No. According to the teachings, we all have the ability for absolute universal compassion, but we don't express it natively, moment by moment, because we have all these. There's something else going on that's directing it in the wrong way. So the reflection and the remembrance and the observation and the meditation is always identifying that and realizing why we're pushing that fiery energy out in this way as opposed to in a way that's towards compassion. So we can relate always the stuff in the New Testament to the Old Testament. And Jesus and the New Testament is written in a way for them to be connected. And when we talk about the fiery sickness and the signs and the miracles and wonders, we can go back to Numbers 21. Now, this is when the Israelites, they misbehaved. Again, this all has to do with us inside. And Moses is us inside as well. Moses represents, in particular, our inner willpower. And then Jehovah said, in order to heal the sickness of the Israelites, all the Israelites got bitten by serpents and they got sick. And what Jehovah said, well, if you make a brazen serpent and put it on a staff or a pole, and then anybody who looks at it will be healed. That's the symbol. And Moses prayed for the people, and Jehovah said unto Moses, make thee a fiery serpent, which is seraph, which begins with shin. and set it upon a pole. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten, when looks, Ra, upon it shall live. And Moses made a serpent of brass and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass that if the serpent had been bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. Except ye see Ra, signs, nes, and wonders, you will not have faith, pistis. When he looks, Ra, upon it, upon what? The pole. The word pole is the same word for sign in Hebrew. It's the same analogy. The sick Israelites looked upon the sign, the pole, the Cana in Galilee, because Cana means pole, upon the brazen serpent. So the brass or bronze serpent represents a metal alloy, two metals combining together, which is alchemy, which is a combination of our forces, which comes together most powerfully in the sexual act. All the forces are available there to make the brazen serpent. But we have to know how to raise it upon the pole. So that is why Yeshua descended into Galilee in order to heal the sick nobleman's son with the power of Christ, the power of Shin, the fire, in order to raise that energy at the 7th hour on the left side.